Hi, I'm John Stevenson, and we're going to be looking at Proverbs chapter 9. A great chapter because this is going to put it all together. In chapters 1 through 9 of our outline of Proverbs, we've noted that there's going to be 10 speeches. We're coming down to the final speeches in that section. Back in chapter 7, we saw the adulteress calling in the streets. She's in the street, in the square, at every street corner. She makes her appeal to the one who is simple, who lacks judgment. She's the one who gives in to her. It costs his life. And then we saw the parallel to that, the contrast with that, Lady Wisdom. This was in chapter 8. Lady Wisdom's appeal. She was also in the street. She stands on the height, by the road, by the gate, at entrances. She makes her appeal to the one who's simple. Notice almost it almost describes the same person. She's making her appeal to the foolish person. Uh, Stop being foolish. Come and follow me. And whoever finds me finds life. So that was chapter 7, chapter 8. Chapters 9 now are going to follow a similar structure. Chapter 9, we're going to start off with Lady Wisdom again. But this time, there's a rich banquet that's being held in her home. And so her appeal is, let all who are simple come here. She's wealthy. She's going to send her maids to invite people to her banquet. It is lavish. Her house is a splendid home. It has 7 pillars. The meal is sumptuous. It's meat and wine. Remember, not everybody ate meat back then. That's what we're going to see in chapter 9, verses 1 through 12. But then remember how we started off with the adulteress and then went to wisdom in chapter 7 and 8? Here we started off with Lady Wisdom. Now we're going to see we're going to switch gears. In verse 13, it will be Lady Folly, the foolish one, and she's going to offer people a meal too, but it's not going to be as good of a meal. It's going to be sort of paltry by comparison. So her appeal, let all who are simple come here. Well, that's the same appeal, but she's poor. There's no maid. She just sits at the door, and whoever comes, comes. And her house is described as nothing to speak of. And her meal, well, it's bread and water. so, so you're supposed to hear and see the contrast between the two. Let's jump in. Chapter 9, verse 1, the call to a banquet. Wisdom has built her house. She has hewn out her 7 pillars. So she's built, she's hewn. Notice the house, the 7 pillars. She's prepared her food. She's mixed her wine. She's also set her table. She has sent out her maidens. She calls from the tops of the heights of the city. So she's calling out, time to come and accept her invitation. Notice, by the way, the 7 pillars. What's the significance of 7? Now, we see that number a lot in the scriptures, going all the way back to the 6 days of creation, and then the 7th day God rests. So 7 is a significant number. It's interesting. I was tempted, and remember how I said that there were 10 sections in chapter 9. Depending on how you count them, you can actually count them as 7. But I decided not to fudge with it. I just left it the way I saw it. And so I didn't really try to see that as a significance. We continue now, verse 4. Whoever is naive, let him turn in here. In other words, if you're foolish, if you lack understanding, then listen up. Now, if you're wise, maybe you don't need more wisdom. I think you do, actually. None of us are that wise. But the call is to the naive, to the one who lacks understanding. Come, eat of my food. Remember, chapters 1 through 9 is a call for wisdom, a call on why you need it. And so here comes the call, come eat of my food and drink of the wine I have mixed. It's sort of interesting. Eating and drinking reminds me of something that Christians do. When we come to the Lord's table, there's that which is eaten and that which we drink. But here the call is, forsake your folly and live, and proceed in the way of understanding. He who corrects a scoffer. Now we actually are going to put some wisdom into practice. He who corrects a scoffer gets dishonor for himself. You think, well, correcting a scoffer would be good, but no, the scoffer doesn't want to be corrected. He who reproves a wicked man, so if you correct a scoffer, you get dishonor. He who reproves a wicked man gets insults for himself. Notice the point that scoffers and wicked all too often want to remain there. Usually somebody is scoffing and says, you shouldn't do that. They don't say, oh, you're right, I should. A wicked person, upon getting reproved, doesn't say, you're right, I shouldn't have been wicked, I should be righteous. That doesn't generally happen. And so he continues, do not reprove a scoffer, or he will hate you. Reprove a wise man. You see the difference? Notice the contrast in verse 8. Reprove a wise man, and he's going to love you. What a difference. So here's the question, when you are reproved, what is your response? Do you respond in defense, self-defense? Do you respond as a retort? Do you respond, maybe not outwardly, but inward, I don't really like that? Or do you respond in love? I'm so glad you told me the thing I was doing wrong. Give instruction to a wise man, and he will be still wiser. Notice the fool, it's the call for the fool is to get wisdom. The call for the wise man is become wiser, and he will get still wiser. Teach a righteous man, and he will increase his learning. And so here are the two different responses to wisdom. Either you can love and embrace it, or you will dishonor it, you will reject it, you will insult it, you will turn away from it. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. We've read those words before. This is how we started back in chapter 1, verse 7. And we've come full circle now to the end of this section. Chapters 1 through 9 are a section. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. And the knowledge of the Holy One is understanding. So that was chapter 1, verse 7. Just repeat it again. For by me your days will be multiplied, and years of life will be added to you. Chapter verse 11, you say it, and then you say the same thing with slightly different words, maybe a little bit of different emphasis, but that's parallelism at work. If you are wise, you are wise for yourself. And if you scoff, you alone will bear it. Now, that's not to say that sometimes you don't influence others, but the point is you are responsible, here it is, for your own wisdom and for your own lack thereof. You are responsible for your reaction to wisdom. What are you going to do? Are you going to accept it, embrace it? You're the one that's going to benefit. Yes, others might too, but you're wise for yourself. And if you scoff, you alone will bear it. It reminds me of something that Paul says in Galatians chapter 6. Bear one another's burdens, yes, but we must each stand before the Lord. We must each bear the responsibility for our own burden, for our own response. And so there's both a promise and then this focus on individual responsibility. Now we turn to the invitation to folly. The woman of folly is boisterous. She is naive and knows nothing. She sits at the doorway of her house on a seat by the high places of the city, calling to those who pass by, who are making their paths straight. In other words, they're doing the right thing, and she's calling them, leave your straight path, leave your righteous path, come and follow me. Whoever is naive, let him turn in here, the foolish one. And to him who lacks understanding, she says, and here's the call, it's almost like its own proverb, stolen water is sweet. Now, this is a false proverb. This is the proverb that she gives to try to entice people. Stolen water is sweet, and bread eaten in secret is pleasant. Now, let me just say, it sounds enticing, but it's a lie. And that's seen in verse 18. But he does not know that the dead are there, that her guests are in the depths of Sheol. Remember how we saw death in Sheol back in chapter 7, verse 27? Her house is the way to Sheol, descending to the chamber of death. So here we're back again. And the point is, she's giving an invitation to one place, but she ends up taking her guests to another place entirely. And so Sheol, death, here we come. Now, why has Proverbs chapters 1 through 9 spent so much time, especially in the last 4 or 5 or maybe 6 chapters, speaking about sex? Why is that become such a focus? I think it's because it spans your life. you know, you're born with gender and you end up with gender. There's a sense in which it brought you here. Remember the references to your mother and father back in chapter 1, verse 8. And as we see, it can take you out with these references to death and Sheol. Uh, so so it's an important aspect, and it's a weakness that people have. Now, the 10 speeches of Proverbs chapters 1 through 9, haven't really gone through all of them like this, so let me just point them out. Back in chapter 1, there was a warning against following sinners, and then halfway through, there was a call of wisdom. So notice how it went back and forth. And then there was a calling out to wisdom in chapter 2, and then the results of that wisdom, as chapter 2, verses 12 through 22. Those are our first 4 sections. Incidentally, remember when I said you can divide that up in 7? I was actually tempted to make that all into one section, but we didn't do that. So we ended up with 10 instead of 7. And then chapters 3 and 4 give wisdom and good consequences. And chapters 5 and 6 contrast that with folly and bad consequences. And part of those bad consequences, we're talking about adultery, but that wasn't the main heading. But now notice as we got to chapter 7, that now became the main heading, where the adulteress calls in the street in chapter 7, and then wisdom's appeal in the street, we saw chapter 8. And now in chapter 9, we've seen the 2 banquets, wisdom's banquet, and then folly's, can't really call it a banquet, it's just a meal, bread and water, not all that tasty, not all that nourishing. Now, these chapters then are a call to have a romance with wisdom. Let me say that again, a romance with wisdom. Wisdom was here before you were, that point was well made, and wisdom can keep you from death. So romance her. It reminds me of something that Jesus says in Revelation chapter 3, verse 20. Behold, I stand at the door and knock. Incidentally, when Jesus says this and when John records it, when we get over to the Song of Solomon, there's a couple places in the Song of Solomon that are echoed in both the Gospel of John and in the writings of John, including the book of Revelation. And this is one of those echoes. When you hear, I stand at the door and knock, that's actually pulled in a familiar phrase from the Song of Solomon, which is a book about romance. So I think my point stands. This is a call to have a romance with wisdom, and in this case, a romance with Jesus, because it's the same thing. Behold, I stand at the door and knock. If anyone hears my voice and opens the door, I will come into him and dine with him, and he with me. You've been called, can I say it this way? You've been called to a romantic dinner with wisdom, with the Lord, with Jesus himself. Will you accept his dinner invitation? The meal is out of this world.